It's Top 5 Friday, and today we're going to drill down the 5 best vintage watches you can get for under 1,000 US dollars. Welcome to Top 5 Friday, affectionately known as Top 5 Day, and we're going to pick up where we left off last week and name the 5 best vintage watches you can get for under 1,000 US dollars. This category gives us a lot more options than the $500 category, so I have to say I had a bit of a trickier time narrowing it down to 5. Now, why not just make a list of 7 or 10, you might ask? Well, great question, and the answer is because then it wouldn't be Top 5 Day. But don't worry, there's some honorable mentions at the end, so if you want a few bonus choices, stick around till the end of the video. Starting us off at number 5 is a Waltham chronograph. Now this is powered by the Valjoux 7733 movement. This was a very popular chronograph movement back in the 60s and 70s, and it is the standard 2-register chronograph that can be found in many different brands from that era. Now the only reason I picked Waltham is because in my opinion it's one of the more reputable and more heritage oriented brands that you can still get for under $1,000, but really this category encompasses almost any chronograph powered by a Valjoux 733, and these were made by Waltham, Wittnauer, Klebar, Zodiac, Jugina, I mean the list goes on. So pick your favorite, find one you like, it's a pretty good value. Number 4 on our list is a continuation from last week with the Tudor Prince date. Now, please take note that this is the post-1969 version. You can tell because it has the applied logo at the top rather than the printed rose logo that we mentioned last time. So last week was the Tudor Small Rose Prince, which can sometimes still be found for under $500. You'll be hard-pressed to find a post-1969 Tudor Prince for that price, but they are readily available under $1,000. These have Tudor customized ETA movements, Rolex Oyster cases, and the excellent quality control and heritage that Tudor is known for. The only reason this isn't further up the list is because Tudor already has a spot in last week's top 5. Down to number 3, we actually have our first non-Swiss watch of the list, which is the Grand Seiko High Beat. Now this is not to be confused with the Grand Seiko of today that sells for over $5,000. These are from the 70s, but they still have a high beat movement that beats at 36,000 beats per hour. That's an incredibly high beat rate and makes for some very good mechanical accuracy. Overall, I wouldn't say this is the most attractive watch in the group, but when you consider value per dollar, it really is top notch. This was Seiko's top-of-the-line offering in the 70s and still performs exceptionally well. Making it down to number 2 on our list of best vintage watches under $1,000 is the Universal Genève polerouter, which I mentioned in the previous video. The polerouter is a micro-rotor movement, which if you don't know, that means that the rotor which winds the main spring is not on top of the movement, but is smaller and on the same plane as the mechanism itself, which allows it to be fit in a much thinner case. Now this watch is called the polerouter in honor of the first international flight to fly above the poles. The watch is a very attractive black dial with an engine turn chapter ring around the inside of it. It's a distinctive design, and a few other companies attempted something similar, but none quite as identifiable as the polerouter. For under $1,000 with this micro-rotor movement, you can't go wrong. Finally, rounding us out at number 1 is the Omega Constellation. Now this is a fantastic watch, and many of them still cost over $1,000. However, if you're a careful shopper and you're willing to buy one from the 70s as opposed to perhaps the 60s, you can find one for under $1,000. The dogleg cases from the 60s are one of the most distinctive design traits of the Constellation and are one of the reasons that that watch still commands over $1,000. The other reason, of course, being the signature pipe hand dial. Now, if you're willing to forego the pipe hand dial and the dogleg case in exchange for a lower price, you can have one of these cushion-cased, flat-dialed 70s Constellations for under $1,000. I have to add a word of caution here. The Omega Constellation is one of the most heavily Frankensteined watches out there. What this means is that some unscrupulous dealers will take parts from many different watches and kind of piece them together to create a Frankenwatch. That's a wristwatch that never existed on its own, but instead is just an amalgamation of parts from various places. Some of these parts may not belong in the watch. They may come from different models, from different eras, or they may just simply be incorrect altogether. The fact that unauthentic constellations are so difficult to identify makes this a dangerous buy. But if you do your homework and you buy from a reputable source, you can get one of these excellent timepieces for under $1,000. Now that brings us to the end of our top 5-day list, but there are a few honorable mentions that I would like to discuss. The first is the Omega Chronostop. Now, I didn't want to put two watches from the same brand in the top 5 list. I don't think that's very fair, but the Chronostop is an excellent watch. It's the 865 movement, which is similar to the 861 that powers the Moon watch. However, it doesn't have any subdial registers. It is simply just a seconds chronograph hand. I think it's a neat watch, but I don't necessarily love the way it looks. It doesn't really do anything for me. I would much prefer a Constellation, so that's the watch that I went with. The two other honorable mentions for this week are the Zodiac Seawolf, which was one of the most successful divers of its time, and the Omega Seamaster. Now, the Seamaster appeared in last week's video, but the reason I mention it again is because if you're willing to up your price just a little bit, for under $1,000, you can now have a solid gold variety. Under $500, you'll be hard-pressed to find anything but steel or maybe 10-karat gold filled. That rounds out our list for this Friday, so if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe, and stick around because there's plenty more coming soon. Thanks for watching The Critical Gentleman.